In this lesson, we'll take a look at the exit for and exit sub keywords. The exit for syntax is used to exit a for loop prematurely before it's done with its natural iteration. And the exit sub keywords are used to exit a procedure prematurely before it reaches the last line of code within it. Let's take a look at both of these things, starting with exit for. In my workbook, I have a list of the 12 months starting with January and going all the way down to December. And here's what I want to do. I want to iterate over all of these cells, and I want to change the font to Comic Sans MS. However, if I run into a value of August, I want to stop the iteration. So I want to stop what I'm doing at that point in the looping process. A real-life use case of something like this is if you have two reports in a single spreadsheet. Imagine that you have a report that sits above another report, and you want to iterate over every line in the very first report and perform some kind of operation on every single line. You're going to have to write some kind of logic to figure out where the top report ends so you don't execute the iteration on the bottom report. That's a perfect example of a use case for something like this. Sometimes you may want to iterate through every row in a spreadsheet, but you may want to say stop at this point if some condition is met. Tell it, don't go on any further. We've covered everything we need to cover. So let's pretend what we want to hit here is August. That's our endpoint. Everything up until August, and let's say including August as well, we want to change the font of that. Anything past that we want to leave alone. How can we implement something like that? I'll begin here with a procedure called finding August. That sounds like some kind of romantic comedy. So finding August. What we want to do first is to get the last row. This is just the best practice. We can, of course, iterate from 1 to 12, but let's follow the best practices here and dynamically calculate the last row. We can declare a variable called last row. We'll make it a long data type, which is a whole number. And we can use the familiar syntax to get the actual value of the last row. We can use the cells property. We can get all of the rows in the spreadsheet. This is going to be a value like 1,048,000 something. We'll target that row in column 1. So this is the bottom left cell in our worksheet. Once we have that cell, we want to move upwards. So we can use the end keyword, X cell up, to simulate the press of an end button followed by the up arrow key, which will bring us to the last row of data. In column A, that's going to be row number 12, but just the cell right now. So in order to actually get the numeric value of the row, we have to attach the row property. So now last row is going to have the value of the last row, which is going to be 12. Our next step is to actually perform the iteration. So I'll declare an iterator variable of I, also a long, it's a whole number. And this time I'm going to iterate from I equal to 1. Again, I right now is just going to represent our row. We haven't referenced the row yet, but I is going to go from 1 to 2 to 3 all the way to 12. And we want to iterate from 1 to the value of last row, which is going to be 12. We could put a step 1 in here, but that is the default behavior, incrementing by a value of 1, so we don't have to. The last thing I want to do here before I actually write the body, of course, is to write my next I. That just ensures that I is going to be incremented after the block of code within the for loop is executed. The first thing I wanted to do is to change the font of the cell to Comic Sans MS. I can do that right here within the for loop. We're not checking yet if it's August, but we want to perform that process up until the point that we get to August. So this is the standard default behavior of what we want to do within the for loop. So I can use the cells property, target the current cell that I'm iterating over. The value of the row is going to be changing from 1 to 2, so to 3 to 4. That's represented by I, so we can put I here as the row index argument. The column is going to stay consistent. It's always column 1 or column A. And once I have that range object of a single cell, that range object has a font property, another object called font. A font object has a name property, and we can assign that to a string of the font we want to use. I want to change the font to Comic Sans MS, and that should do it. Now we have to actually check if the value is equal to August. How can we do that? Well, we can get the value of the cell. So once again, the same syntax as the line above. We're going to get that range that represents that single cell. We're going to begin with A1, then A2, then A3, and so on. We want to get the value, and then we want to compare that value with August. So we're going to use the equality operator, the equal sign. Whenever we write an if statement, we need to add a then at the end and an end if. And right here is where we're going to write the code for what to do if that if statement is met. So if that if evaluates to true, if the cell's value is August, we want to exit the for loop. We want to call it a day. We want to say stop this iteration, no more incrementation, no more repeating of this block of code, just move on. The way we do that is with the keywords exit space for. Exactly as the name suggests, we are exiting the for loop. It doesn't matter where it is in the process. It could be in the first iteration, it could be in the last iteration. In this case, it's right around the middle, but we are exiting completely. No other iterations will run. Now, if there is code below the for loop, that code would still execute, but the for loop in our procedure is the last thing that we're doing in this finding August procedure. So as soon as this for loop is done, the procedure is done as well. There's one more thing I want to do here. What I want to do is just make sure that we are actively targeting August, that everything has functioned as expected. So what I want to do here is when we get to this point, I want to make sure we highlight the cell so that we can verify that that's the point where it stopped. What I can do here is just do cells I of 1 and just highlight it for now. So we're going to just select it with the mouse cursor so we can see that it ended on the cell that we expected it to end on, which is August. So let's go ahead and execute this. I'm going to drag my cursor away from here. So if everything goes as planned, all of this text should be Comic Sans up to and including August. Once we get to August, this is going to value to true. We're going to select the cell, then we're going to exit the for loop, and none of the cells below August should have their font changed. So let's see what happens here. Here we go, 3, 2, 1. Perfect. Worked exactly as expected. So January through August has had their font changed to Comic Sans. The ones below are unaffected. So we have prematurely ended the for loop. We have backed out of it. We have terminated it prematurely, and we do that here with the exit for keyword. Now let's take a look at the exit sub keywords. Exit sub is going to be used to prematurely exit a sub or a procedure before it is done concluding. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new sheet here. And let me just go ahead and zoom in so we can see it a little bit better. And I'm going to populate a couple numbers here, just random numbers here. Let's do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And what I want to do is create a procedure that's going to allow the user to highlight with their selection, which means with the mouse, with this little cursor, select a clump of cells, and whenever they execute the macro, it's going to double the value within every single cell. How can we do something like that? Well, we can begin here by writing a procedure. I'm going to call it double cell value. And what I want to do first is I want to iterate over the user's selection. Remember that the user's selection is just a valid range object. So as we're iterating over each thing in a range, we're iterating over a cell. And a cell is just another range object. So I'll begin by declaring a variable called cell. It's going to be a range object. Then I'm going to begin a for loop. This is going to be an actual for each loop. We're now not manually specifying the iterator variable. We're actually telling VBA to dynamically calculate it. So it's going to run over all of the cells in our selection. So for each cell in selection, selection again is a property on the application object that stores the actual selection or the thing that the user has highlighted, the clump of one or more cells. We want to make sure we put a next cell at the bottom here so that we move on to the next one. All right. What we can do here to double the value in each cell is simply get the cell value, multiply it by 2, and then reassign it back to the cell that we're currently on. So we can do cell.value equals cell.value times 2. It's a little bit of a confusing syntax, but remember that whatever's on the right side of the equal sign takes place first. So whatever the current value in the cell is, we're going to grab that. This is just a number. We're going to multiply that by 2 to get a new result. Then we're going to overwrite the value in the cell. So as an example, whenever we're right here on cell E1, number 5, we're going to calculate 5 right here. Times 2 is equal to 10. This is going to evaluate to 10 on the right side. And we're going to overwrite that exact same cell, which we still have a reference to because we're still in the for loop. We're going to overwrite that cell with double the original value. In this case, 5 is going to be overwritten by 10. So let's go see if this works right now. I'm going to select and make an actual selection here. So here we have the highlighted cells. Execute this. We should see everything double. Perfect. So everything looks great so far. But what if we want to make this a little bit more elegant and we want to prepare for some kind of alternate scenario? Let's say the selection is going to include something like a blank cell, something like this. And for some reason, we can decide that if there's a blank cell in the user selection, We want to stop the entire procedure. We want to say something is not going right here. This isn't correct. We're going to stop execution of everything, not just the for loop, but completely the rest of the procedure is not going to run. Pretend that executing some kind of forward step is going to lead to a mistake in this spreadsheet, some kind of thing that can't be reversed. We want to exit the sub completely, exit the procedure completely if we run into some kind of case. How can we create that for something like this? Well, what we can do here is something like this. We can write, first of all, we only want to do this line of code if the cell has a valid numeric value. So I can say if the cell's value is not equal to, let's say, blank is what we're checking for. So if it's not equal to empty string, which means if it does have some kind of valid number, in that case, I do want to do this. I want to take the cell's value, multiply it by 2, overwrite the cell. Let's make sure to add the end if here. But here in my else statement, I'm going to introduce the keywords that we've been looking to learn in this lesson, which is the exit sub keywords. So what exit sub is going to do, it's not just going to exit the entire for loop, it's going to end the entire procedure. All of double cell value, the entire thing is just going to end. No more lines of code to be executed. It doesn't matter if we have 40 lines of code below the for loop. This exit sub, if it's hit, will completely terminate everything. So the reason I wanted to introduce this in the same lesson as exit for is because exit for doesn't end the procedure. It simply ends the for loop and any other code remaining will still run. Exit sub, in comparison, will terminate everything. If it's in a for loop, it will terminate the for loop and the procedure. No matter where you put it, it's just going to end the entire procedure completely. Let's just do one more thing here. I want to alert the user that they did something wrong, so I can do a message box with something like, there's a blank cell here. Not cool. All right. So that's just a little bit of an alert to the user that something's gone wrong. So let's try it again. I'm going to create a selection here. And what we're going to see is everything is going to function up until we get to this cell, which is actually going to be the 8th cell in a row, because the for each iteration over a range moves horizontally from column to column. So we're going to go from 2 to 4 to 6 to 8 to 10. Once we're done with row number 1, we're going to move on to the next row of our selection. 12, 14, we're going to get to this empty cell. That's where it's going to break. But the 7 values that we've encountered up to that point will still be doubled. So we're going to see 4, 8, 12 here, and so on. Let's see how this works. I have it selected, F5 right here. All right, we can see the values here have changed. And now it's going to say there's a blank cell here, not cool. All right. We can see here that the 2 values we have at the end, 18 and 20, have not been doubled. That's because right here, when we ran into this condition of the cell being blank, we hit this else clause, and within there we exited the sub. So we never even got a chance to reach these 2 cells and have them be evaluated. That's what exit sub does. It completely terminates the procedure no matter where you are in the process. That's all there is to cover in this lesson. I'll see you in the next one.